In essence, the economy never functions naturally like a forest. It is programmed and controlled step by step by powerful groups, central banks, large corporations, and those who control the flow of money. Welcome to The Quiet Mind, a place where the mind is still. Today, we will explore the cycles of an economy together. Cycle 1. Growth. When the economy slows down, production weakens, unemployment rises, and consumption drops. That is when the power groups and central banks will not sit idly by. What must they do now? They create a growth cycle. First, they must pump blood into the system, meaning they pump money. However, pumping money is not as simple as printing it and throwing it into the market like tossing a bunch of vegetables at a street market. They pump money through clever channels. Public investment is a prime example. The state will pour money into major infrastructure projects like bridges, roads, airports, and industrial zones to create jobs, generate demand for materials, and stimulate the economy from the roots. Industrial zones expand production land and invite FDI so that foreign money also flows into the domestic economy. Commercial banks are injected with cheap capital and required to lend to businesses and individuals at lower interest rates. In other words, money is pumped systematically, not haphazardly. Next, they begin to lower interest rates. Lowering interest rates is an extremely strong message. Hey, money is cheap. Borrow it, invest it. Don't just sit on your cash. And to make that message effective, they coordinate with the media. You will see newspapers, TV, and social media continuously and simultaneously release news. Nations determined to recover the economy. New investment opportunities. Banks lower interest rates to support businesses, aiming to hit the psychology of the masses. The economy is about to recover. I must buy a house, invest in stocks, and expand my business. However, right before interest rates are lowered, a very subtle move occurs. Savings interest rates are unexpectedly increased slightly or kept at an attractive level. The purpose is to suck the cash flow back from the people and businesses to circulate capital within the banking system, preparing for the subsequent cycle of lowering rates. Specifically, commercial banks, with information systems faster than the public, always know before monetary policy changes. They adjust their borrowing and lending portfolios before going public to the market to optimize profits from interest rate spreads. Cash flow is gathered, and resources are fully prepared to be pumped out heavily as soon as the signal to lower interest rates is given. Parallel to that, the state will reduce taxes, reducing VAT, reducing corporate income tax, reducing land taxes, all to make production and business cheaper and easier. They support investment channels by opening credit rooms for real estate, loosening stock lending, and even being more lenient with the crypto market if there is a need to attract money. But wait, if they only pump money in, the cash flow could run astray, even escaping the national system. Therefore, barriers are needed. With foreign currency, they will limit free trading, restrict transferring money abroad, and even create exchange rate differentials between inside and outside the banks to lock in the cash flow. With gold, they will monopolize imports and make domestic gold prices higher than the global price. Buying domestic gold is a loss, to reduce speculation. The goal of all these actions is to keep the cash flow circulating within the internal economy, not letting it escape. Additionally, to increase the attractiveness of domestic production, they will adjust the exchange rate of the local currency. If they need stronger exports, nations may devalue the local currency. Cheap goods will flood international markets, exports will rise, and FDI will pour in. If they need to curb inflation, they simply increase the value of the local currency. Imports become cheaper, and domestic prices stabilize. All of these steps are strategic decisions, not arbitrary at all. No economy functions naturally. Everything is designed, programmed, and controlled from the source. Cycle 2, tightening money, cooling down, and controlling bubbles. After pumping money, lowering interest rates, and stimulating consumption and investment, the economy begins to run hot again. Businesses expand production massively. People rush to buy houses, cars, and land. The stock market rises like a storm. Real estate continuously hits new peaks, and consumer goods prices also begin to climb. These all seem like good signals, but not necessarily. If cash flow runs too fast and too strong, it will blow up asset bubbles, push inflation out of control, and eventually cause an early crisis. Therefore, national governments and central banks cannot sit still and witness this. They must intervene. First is tightening the money supply. Key interest rates are gradually raised, commercial bank lending rates follow, and savings rates are pushed high. The goal is to make borrowing costs more expensive, forcing people and businesses to think twice before borrowing money for consumption, buying houses, or expanding production. Simultaneously, they suck idle money back into banks, reducing the amount of cash circulating in the market. In this stage, the savings interest rate is an extremely powerful weapon. At this time, society will understand that depositing money in the bank is safer than investing in assets. They tighten credit rooms, limiting the total amount of money banks are allowed to lend out. They prioritize credit for essential industries and restrict it from flowing into real estate, stocks, or financial speculation. The goal is to prevent cash flow from entering hot sectors prone to creating bubbles. The government begins to issue more short-term bonds with high interest rates. Commercial banks, investment funds, and the public will withdraw money from the market to buy bonds. The goal is to attract cash flow out of stocks, real estate, and consumption and return it to holding government bonds. Safe, but capital is locked. If the speculative flow of dollars increases strongly, they will slightly loosen the exchange rate to weaken the local currency, making imports more expensive, thereby limiting consumption while increasing pressure on import prices. They increase real estate transfer taxes, tighten taxes on income from stock investments, and increase fees and costs for land and asset registration. When transaction costs are higher, people will engage less in surfing and speculating on assets. Previously, the press simultaneously released news about investment opportunities and strong recovery. But now that same lineup begins to change its tune. Be cautious with real estate bubble risks. Central bank tightens monetary policy. Risk of growth slowing down in the next 12 months. On one hand, this directly impacts the psychology of the masses. Careful, don't be too euphoric. On the other hand, it helps the government reduce speculative haste. And specifically, commercial banks again stay one step ahead. When they see signals of upcoming money tightening, they will sell off risky investment portfolios like real estate and stocks, increase liquidity reserve ratios, and withdraw cash flow from the financial speculative margin market. The strong have already managed to retreat before the market begins to fall into a cold phase. The goal of cycle 2 is to cool down the economy gradually rather than letting it collapse, to deflate asset bubbles in a controlled manner, and to maintain the stability of the national financial banking system, preparing a new ground for the next growth cycle. The next cycle, crisis. At this stage, inflation has peaked. Consumer goods, energy, and services all rise in price at a dizzying pace. The unemployment rate is not yet high, but begins to leak bad signs, with the number of people losing jobs increasing steadily every month, and the government is forced to tighten spending. Non-essential public investment projects will be drastically cut. The budget is reallocated to prioritize key sectors such as healthcare, security, and basic social welfare. Simultaneously, the government proceeds to increase indirect taxes, VAT, and special consumption taxes more aggressively to suck up the excess cash flooding the market. This is also a way to increase budget revenue without causing psychological shock to society. The central bank acts decisively, rapidly increasing key interest rates, each time by 0.5% to 1%, instead of keeping them steady as before. Credit is tightened comprehensively. Real estate, stock, and consumer sectors have their credit rooms choked, with disbursement prioritized only for essential production industries. They sell off foreign exchange reserves heavily into the market to keep the local currency from collapsing and to fight imported inflation. The main goal of the policy system at this time is to stop the momentum of inflation that is out of control, to cool down consumption and speculation expectations in society, and to protect the financial banking system from falling into a chain reaction of defaults. The general situation of businesses at this point, when entering a crisis, is extremely tragic. Revenue drops sharply because people tighten their spending, buying only what is truly essential. Financial costs, bank loans, skyrocket due to continuously high interest rates, while revenue decreases and profit margins turn negative. Many companies operate only perfunctorily. Those businesses that previously grew hot using debt, especially in real estate and stocks, begin to collapse because they can no longer afford to pay interest. And the mandatory response of businesses is they must lay off personnel on a large scale to cut operating costs, suspend all expansion projects, maintaining only minimum activities to survive, and they must liquidate assets, quickly selling off real estate, stocks, and fixed assets to bring in cash for debt repayment. Healthy businesses with good cash flow and low debt will not rush to invest, but will hold on to cash, waiting for the opportunity to hunt for cheap assets during the bottom phase. 3. The markets. Gold. This asset becomes a safe haven. The gold price will not spike immediately, but will increase in violent waves due to negative news. Investors sell off other assets and gradually move into gold and USD. Real estate. The market freezes almost entirely. Prices begin to drop sharply in speculative segments, suburban land and high-end apartments. Pressure from forced liquidations by investors with large debts serves as the supply. Sell-offs increase, but there are no buyers. Stocks, market indices plummet without a parachute. Transactions mainly consist of selling off to cut losses, while trading volume dries up more and more. Small stocks like mid-caps or pennies fall into a state of clinical death with no liquidity. Listed companies simultaneously report losses, stop paying dividends, and cancel plans for further issuance. Foreign currency. The local currency faces strong devaluation pressure as foreign capital has withdrawn to find shelter, mainly in USD and gold. The state bank will have to continuously intervene by selling US dollars to the market, but the effectiveness will increasingly decline. Measures to control free foreign currency become strict, restricting buying and selling on the black market and increasing controls on the import of luxury goods. The government and the central bank simultaneously increase key interest rates sharply to suck cash flow out of the consumer economy. They issue government bonds massively with extremely high interest rates to attract money from the population and the banking system. They continue to tighten credit, almost closing the door on speculative real estate, stocks, and non-essential consumption. Indirect taxes are increased, pushing the price of luxury items high to discourage consumers. Free foreign currency transactions are restricted, and luxury import taxes are increased to protect foreign exchange reserves. All of the above measures focus on one ultimate goal: cutting off the financial blood pumped into speculation to push the economy back toward actual production. 4. Impact on public psychology and cash flow. Public psychology at this time becomes extremely negative, absolute fear. There is no more trust in the asset and financial markets. Consumption drops sharply. People will only buy what is truly essential. A defensive psychology prevails. Everyone will hold tight to cash, gold, or USD, and no one thinks of investing anymore. Cash flow in society mainly lies idle in banks in the form of savings, with a small portion moving to shelter in gold and USD. Business and production capital flows will shrink, maintaining only in basic industries like food, healthcare, and utilities. The overall result is that asset market liquidity almost freezes and economic growth falls to an extremely low level, possibly negative. The banking system must survive based on government credit and deposits from the people. In short, a crisis is the bottom-flushing stage of the entire system. Assets drop in value en masse, trust is shattered, and cash flow shrinks. Money-locking policies are strictly enforced, accepting short-term pain to save the long-term system. The final cycle, the bottom. When everything stops moving to wait for a transformation, the economy falls into a technical coma. No growth, no consumption, no expectations. The task of the government and the central bank now is to keep the ventilator running. The government will cut all secondary spending from workshops, research, and promotion, shifting directly to spending on unemployment benefits. hospital fees, and education, basically basic expenditures. They keep the budget deficit at a controllable level, because at this time, if the credit market rating drops, they will no longer be able to borrow internationally, causing the risk of public debt to increase. They run media campaigns to control bad signals. No one says the economy is dying. It's all macro stability. Need to persist with target policies, aiming to keep expectations low but not allow panic. What about the central bank? They lower the key interest rate like drops in an IV drip, not to encourage borrowing but to reduce the cost of capital for the system, sending a signal that things are under control. However, they do not lower it deeply immediately for fear of a bubble returning too early when there is no demand yet. They suck up money gently with short-term bonds to both control liquidity and keep money within the system. They limit exchange rate fluctuations to prevent massive hoarding of USD and capital flight. During this stage, everything revolves around one goal: maintaining the veneer of system stability until restructuring can occur. Businesses. Revenue is in a disastrous state, inventory is high, and financial costs exceed endurance. Domestic demand has shriveled, and international orders are postponed indefinitely. To still have credit is to still be alive, but they are also burning through blood. What must businesses do? Lay off personnel, withdraw from risky segments. Personnel are kept only as a core team, with everything else outsourced. They will negotiate with banks. If they can't pay the principal, they will pay the interest. If they can't pay the interest, they will have the debt frozen. All negotiations happen in silence because one collapse would pull down the whole chain. No investment, no expansion, no marketing. They live only on old orders or lean on essential orders. Surviving businesses, those who silently lay the foundation for a new cycle. Most small businesses have withdrawn from the market. Those remaining survived the crisis not because they were stronger, but because they controlled their blood, meaning their cash flow. They do not expand but silently restructure their debt, inventory, and personnel. They do not make new investments but quietly buy up machinery and factories from bankrupt rivals. They do not recruit massively but select high-level personnel who lost jobs elsewhere. And this is exactly when the backyards of banks and large corporations go out to collect the corpses of competitors. They do not let prices recover, but keep the frozen state as long as possible to force small businesses to die slowly, buying cheap without being criticized. In the market, gold. It begins to rise slightly due to the need for shelter, but will not break out because of low liquidity. The state will continue to tighten imports and keep exchange rate spreads to anchor cash flow. Real estate. It cannot be valued because there are no real transactions. Banks freeze disbursements, lending only for things like social housing to stop the policy bleeding. Prices do not drop shockingly because they are being held up on paper. The parties know well that real prices are still falling month by month, but no one wants to realize a loss anymore, and the market falls into a zombie state. Stocks. Transactions are low, there are no IPOs and no waves. Margin rooms are frozen, F0 cash flow is gone, F1 investors are beginning to accumulate gradually. Only a few groups live off tabloid rumors. Otherwise, traders gather goods, but very slowly and extremely quietly. Leading interest rates guide expectations down slowly so no one is shocked, but enough to start planning for the future. The psychology of the masses falls into a state of apathy toward the market. There is no more panic, yet there is no more hope either. Everything falls into a state of temporary rest and inactivity. Stocks are not sold or bought. Real estate holders bear losses silently. Buyers wait for real value. Consumption is also minimized, spending only on what is truly necessary. Cash at this time is king. USD is a shelter. However, right in this lull, there are big players who have already started to act. They gather assets under the cover that the market is showing nothing. These are the people who understand the issue. The bottom is not when the price is the lowest, but when expectation is the lowest. The bottom is where those who look the furthest will see opportunity. At the bottom, everyone says the market is dead. But in those seemingly cold numbers, credit is being loosened slightly, disbursements are rising, Employment is ticking up. Interest rates are secretly lowering. The entire system is preparing for a bounce. However, the bounce does not come in a day or two. It comes when there is enough data, enough psychology, and enough trust. But when it comes, it will bounce so strongly that anyone standing outside will not have enough time to get on board.